The cruelest thing a bride can do is arrive everywhere except the altar. Ethan Whitmore learned that at 11:17 on a bright Saturday morning in Manhattan, standing beneath an arch of white roses that cost more than most people earned in a year, with a diamond ring warming in his palm, and 300 guests turning their heads toward the closed cathedral doors. Outside, Fifth Avenue was alive with summer light, polished black cars, flashing cameras, and reporters pressed behind velvet ropes, whispering about the wedding no one thought would happen. The billionaire who never smiled was finally marrying the poor florist who somehow made him human. That was what the headlines had called Claire Bennett. The girl with the rented dresses. The girl who looked people in the eye. The girl who had walked into Ethan Whitmore's marble world and left fingerprints on every cold surface of his life. Ethan stood perfectly still at the altar, his black tuxedo sharp, his silver cuff links catching the light, his expression carved from discipline. He had built hotels across continents, closed billion-dollar deals before breakfast, and faced boardrooms full of men who wanted his throne. Nothing had ever made his hand tremble. Until now. The string quartet began the bridal march. Every guest rose. Ethan inhaled once, slow and controlled, because that was what he did when the world watched him. He controlled the room. He controlled the story. He controlled the damage. Then the cathedral doors opened. Sunlight spilled in. A little flower girl stepped forward in a white dress, clutching a bouquet almost too large for her small hands. Behind her, there was no bride, no veil, no Claire. A murmur moved through the guests like wind through dry leaves. Ethan did not move. His mother's old pearl rosary was wrapped around the base of the bridal bouquet, exactly where Claire had promised it would be. The flower girl walked slowly down the aisle, confused by all the faces staring at her. When she reached Ethan, she lifted the bouquet with both hands. "Miss Bennett said to give this to you," she whispered. Ethan looked down. Tucked between the white roses was a cream-colored envelope, sealed with a single drop of wax. No name, no explanation, just his initials written in Claire's soft, careful handwriting. E.W. His chest tightened so hard, he almost forgot how to breathe. From the front row, his Aunt Margaret leaned toward his cousin and whispered loud enough for half the pew to hear. "I told you she was not one of us." Ethan heard it. He heard the cameras clicking outside. He heard the restless shifting of partners, investors, old family friends, and enemies dressed as guests. But all of it became distant, underwater, meaningless, as he broke the seal with his thumb. The paper inside smelled faintly of lilies and rain. Claire always smelled like flowers and weather, like she belonged to the earth more than to rooms like this. There were only 2 lines. "Forgive me for making you hate me. It is the only way you will survive." Ethan read it once. Then again. The words did not change. The meaning did not arrive. His best man, Daniel Price, stepped closer. "Ethan," he said under his breath. "What happened?" Ethan folded the letter with terrifying care. "Find her." Daniel's face tightened. "I already called the bridal suite. Her phone is off. Her dress is gone. Her mother does not know where she is." For the first time, something broke through Ethan's expression. Not anger. Not yet. Something younger. Something wounded. "That is not possible." Across the aisle, Madeline Frost, his former fiancée, sat in pale blue silk with a sympathy so perfect it looked rehearsed. Beside her, Richard Hale, the chief financial officer of Whitmore Global, lowered his eyes as if out of respect, but the corner of his mouth moved just enough for Ethan to see. A smile. Tiny. Controlled. Gone in a second. Ethan stared at him. The cathedral seemed to tilt. He remembered Claire 3 nights earlier, standing barefoot in the hallway of his penthouse, asking him in a voice too quiet to be casual, "If someone disappeared to protect you, would you ever forgive them?" He had laughed then, not because it was funny, but because he had not understood the fear behind her eyes. "People do not protect me, Claire. They use me, they challenge me, or they leave." She had looked at him for a long moment and said, "Then maybe you would not recognize protection if it broke your heart." He had pulled her close, pressed his mouth to her forehead, and told her that after the wedding there would be no more contracts, no more pretending, no more separate bedrooms and staged photographs and careful lies for the board. He had almost said he loved her. Almost. Now the words sat inside him like glass. The priest cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Whitmore, should we pause the ceremony?" A low ripple of whispers spread again. Ethan looked out at the faces waiting for him to collapse, to rage, to become the humiliation they had all paid in diamonds and silk to witness. His father's portrait, enormous and cold, hung in the memorial alcove near the side wall, watching like a judge. Ethan slipped the wedding ring into his inside pocket, directly over his heart. Then he turned to the guests and spoke with a calm so sharp it silenced the cathedral. "The ceremony is over." Margaret gasped. Someone dropped a program. Reporters outside surged against the ropes as the doors opened, and the first guests hurried out with scandal burning on their tongues. Daniel stepped beside Ethan again. "We can control the press if we move fast. We can say there was a medical emergency. We can say she was overwhelmed." Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the empty aisle. The rose petals looked untouched, a path made for a woman who had chosen not to walk it. "No," he said. "No lies." "Then what do you want me to do?" Ethan looked down at the letter one more time. Claire had not written goodbye. She had not written "I am sorry." She had written "survive." And suddenly, beneath the humiliation, beneath the pain so deep it felt physical, a colder question opened in him. What had Claire known that he did not? He turned his head just enough to see Richard Hale leaving through the side doors, phone already pressed to his ear. Madeline followed seconds later, her smile hidden behind a white handkerchief. Ethan's jaw tightened. Lock down every account tied to the foundation. Pull every security camera from this building, the hotel, and the street outside. Find the taxi records, the staff lists, the florist invoices, everything. Daniel stared at him. "You think she was taken?" Ethan looked back at the empty doorway where his bride should have appeared, and for one unbearable second he saw Claire not as the woman who abandoned him, but as the woman who had been crying before he even knew there was a reason. His voice dropped to a whisper no one else could hear. I think Claire Bennett just broke my heart in front of the whole world because someone gave her no other choice. Then his phone buzzed. One message. Unknown number. No words. Just a photo of Claire in her wedding dress, sitting alone in the back seat of a yellow cab, her hand pressed to the window, tears on her face, and the cathedral disappearing behind her. 90 days before Ethan Whitmore stood alone at the altar, Claire Bennett was on her knees in the ballroom of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, trying to save 200 white roses from a disaster caused by a man in Italian leather shoes. It was 6:42 in the morning, long before the donors, photographers, and board members would arrive for the Whitmore Foundation Gala, and the ballroom glowed with the soft gold of chandeliers not yet fully awake. Staff moved like shadows between linen-covered tables. Crystal glasses waited in perfect rows. Outside the tall windows, Manhattan was still wet from overnight rain, the streets below silver and restless. Claire had been awake since 4. Her hair was pinned badly, one sleeve of her cream blouse was damp from a leaking flower bucket, and her fingertips were stained green from trimming stems. But the centerpieces were finally beginning to look alive. That mattered to her. Flowers, unlike rich people, never pretended to be something they were not. Then a tall man in a dark suit walked straight across the white runner she had spent 20 minutes smoothing and stepped into a low arrangement of roses near the stage. Claire heard the soft crack of stems before she saw his face. Stop, she said, sharper than she meant to. The man froze. Half the staff froze with him. Claire rose so quickly that a loose pin slipped from her hair. Please tell me you did not just walk through the memorial arrangement. The man looked down at the crushed petals near his shoe, then back at her. His face was calm, handsome in a severe way, the kind of face that made people choose their words carefully. Claire was too tired to be careful. There are 10,000 square feet in this ballroom, she said, pointing with a pair of floral shears. You chose the only 2 feet with flowers on it. A young assistant across the room turned pale. Miss Bennett, he whispered. That is Mr. Whitmore. Claire blinked. The name landed with the weight of a dropped chandelier. Ethan Whitmore, billionaire, owner of the hotel, chairman of the foundation. The man whose family name was stitched into the napkins, engraved on the doors, and printed on the paycheck she desperately needed. For one terrible second, Claire thought about apologizing until she disappeared into the carpet. But then she looked at the crushed roses again, and something stubborn inside her stood up first. Then he can afford to watch where he walks, she said quietly. The room went silent. Ethan stared at her. Most people looked at him with hunger, fear, or calculation. This woman looked at him like he was an inconvenience in a tailored suit. He should have been annoyed. Instead, he found himself almost smiling. I ruined them, he asked. You bruised them, Claire corrected, kneeling again to lift the broken stems. Ruined is what happens when someone decides damaged things are no longer worth saving. Something shifted in his eyes. It was so quick she almost missed it. Can you fix it? I can hide the worst of it. That was not my question. Claire looked up. Yes, I can fix it. But I need 20 minutes, warm water, floral tape, and no more billionaires wandering through my work. A low cough came from one of the staff members, covering a laugh. Ethan glanced toward the stage, then back at Claire. You know who I am now, and you are still speaking to me like that. Claire gathered the injured flowers against her arm. I know exactly who you are. That does not make the roses less broken. By 8 o'clock, the arrangement looked untouched. By noon, donors were praising it as the most beautiful piece in the room. By 9, that night, Ethan had watched Claire rescue 3 wilting centerpieces, calm a crying server, and quietly move a place card so an elderly guest would not have to walk too far from the entrance. She did not know he noticed. People rarely noticed kindness when it did not come wrapped in a speech. Ethan noticed everything. He noticed how Claire ate half a dinner roll behind the service curtain because she had missed the staff meal. He noticed how she checked her phone every few minutes, her expression tightening each time. He noticed the hospital bracelet around her wrist, folded into her pocket like a secret. When the gala ended, Claire was loading empty buckets near the service elevator when Ethan appeared beside her. Miss Bennett. She nearly dropped the bucket. Mr. Whitmore, if this is about the roses, I already apologized to the event manager. It is not about the roses. Then I hope it is not about the bread roll. This time he did smile. Barely. Walk with me. Claire hesitated. I still have work. Your supervisor said you were finished. My supervisor says many things when billionaires ask. Ethan held the elevator door open. 5 minutes. She stepped in because rent was due, because her mother's surgery deposit was overdue, and because men like Ethan Whitmore did not ask twice. The elevator climbed to the private floor in silence. Claire stood with her hands clasped around the bucket handle, painfully aware of the streak of green on her sleeve. Ethan stood beside her, immaculate, distant, unreadable. When the doors opened, they entered a penthouse office with glass walls overlooking the city. Manhattan glittered below like someone had spilled diamonds over black velvet. Claire stayed near the doorway. This is not usually where florists get performance reviews, she said. Ethan walked to his desk and picked up a slim folder. My father left a condition in his will. To remain chief executive officer with full voting control, I must be engaged before the next board review and married within 90 days after that. Claire stared at him. That sounds like something from a terrible old movie. It is from a terrible old family. He placed the folder on the desk between them. My board is divided. My cousin wants control. My former fiancée is helping him. If I lose the vote, the company survives, but my mother's foundation will be stripped and sold for pieces. Claire's expression softened at the word mother, but her guard stayed up. Why are you telling me this? Ethan looked directly at her. Because I need a fiancée, not a wife in the real sense. A public arrangement. 90 days. Appearances, events, interviews, family dinners. You will be compensated enough to cover your mother's medical bills and any personal debts. After the required period, we end it respectfully. Claire did not move. The city lights shimmered behind him, cold and impossible. You want to hire me to pretend to love you? I want to hire you to stand beside me. Those are not the same thing. I know. She looked at the folder as if it might burn her. Why me? Ethan's answer came too fast to be a lie. Because this morning you told me the truth when everyone else in that ballroom was paid not to. Claire gave a small, humorless laugh. That is a dangerous reason to trust someone. It is the only reason I have. For a moment, there was only the hum of the city far below. Claire thought of her mother asleep under fluorescent hospital lights in Queens. She thought of unpaid bills stacked beside a chipped coffee mug. She thought of all the doors that had closed because she did not have the right name, the right dress, the right kind of history. What are the rules? She asked. Ethan opened the folder. No romantic expectations. No questions about private matters unless necessary. No interference in business. No unsupervised statements to the press. The arrangement ends after 90 days. Claire's throat tightened. It sounded clean. Safe. Heartless. I have one rule, she said. Ethan lifted his eyes. Name it. Claire stepped closer to the desk, still holding the empty flower bucket like armor. I will not lie about kindness. If your world is cruel, I will not smile and pretend it is normal. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into the drawer, removed a pen, and placed it on top of the contract. Agreed. Claire picked up the pen, but before she signed, she looked at him one more time. This does not mean you own me. Ethan's voice was quiet. No. It means I am asking you to save something I cannot save alone. Claire signed her name. Ethan signed his. Neither of them noticed that on the street far below, inside a parked black sedan, Richard Hale was watching the penthouse windows with his phone raised, capturing the first photograph of the fake engagement that would one day destroy them both. By the next morning, Claire Bennett had a diamond ring on her finger, a non-disclosure agreement in her purse, and a suitcase that looked painfully small in the marble foyer of Ethan Whitmore's penthouse. The elevator doors opened without a sound, revealing a home that seemed less lived in than displayed. Glass walls, pale stone floors, a staircase floating upward like a sculpture, and a view of Manhattan so wide it made Claire feel as if the city had been placed at Ethan's feet. She stood there in her thrift store coat, gripping the handle of her suitcase, while a housekeeper named Mrs. Alvarez offered her a kind smile that almost broke her. Welcome home, Miss Bennett. Claire looked at the impossible room, the silent art on the walls, the chandelier glittering like frozen rain. Thank you, she said softly, though the word home felt too large for a place where nothing carried her name. Ethan stepped out behind her, speaking to Daniel Price on the phone in the calm, clipped tone of a man arranging a merger instead of a life. The announcement goes out at noon. No engagement interview until Claire has media preparation. Keep Richard away from the foundation files until I review them. He paused, glanced at Claire, then lowered his voice. And tell the board I am unavailable tonight. Claire pretended not to hear. That was easier than wondering why the last sentence warmed her more than it should have. Mrs. Alvarez led her down a hallway to a guest suite larger than Claire's entire apartment in Queens. There were fresh towels folded like clouds, a closet empty enough to swallow her 3 dresses, and a small lamp already glowing beside the bed. Claire touched the lampshade. Was this left on by accident? Mrs. Alvarez shook her head. Mr. Whitmore said you might not know the room, so the light should stay on. Claire turned away quickly, embarrassed by the sudden sting behind her eyes. She had mentioned once, while signing paperwork, that she disliked waking in unfamiliar dark rooms. She had not expected Ethan to remember. At noon, the world learned she was engaged. By 12:15, her phone nearly stopped functioning beneath the weight of messages, missed calls, and headlines. Billionaire Ethan Whitmore engaged to mystery florist. By 1 o'clock, someone had found old photographs of her outside the hospital in Queens. By 2 o'clock, strangers online had decided she was either a fairy tale or a fraud. Ethan found her in the kitchen, standing barefoot on polished stone, staring at a tablet full of comments she should never have read. Put it down, he said. Claire flinched and set the tablet face down. I was curious. Curiosity is expensive in my world. Everything is expensive in your world. He looked at her feet. Where are your shoes? I was afraid they would scratch the floor. For a second, his expression changed, almost painfully. Claire, the floor can survive your shoes. She laughed once, but it came out thin. Can your family? That evening, Ethan's Aunt Margaret arrived with a stylist, a public relations consultant, and the expression of a woman attending a funeral she had predicted. Claire stood in the dressing room while gowns were brought in one after another, each more beautiful and more impossible than the last. Margaret circled her slowly. She is pretty enough, she said, as if Claire were furniture being inspected for a hotel lobby. But she must learn restraint. No emotional answers. No mention of bills, hospitals, or work history. America loves poverty only when it photographs well. Claire's face went still. Ethan, who had been reading messages near the doorway, lifted his eyes. Before he could speak, Claire did. My mother's hospital room is not a stain on me, Mrs. Whitmore. Margaret's mouth tightened. That kind of sentiment will embarrass Ethan. Claire looked toward him, expecting him to correct her, to remind her of rule number 3, no unsupervised statements. But Ethan simply closed his phone and said, Margaret, leave the room. His aunt blinked. Excuse me. You heard me. The silence that followed was polished and deadly. Margaret left with the stylist trailing behind her, carrying a silver gown over both arms like an apology. Claire stared at Ethan. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did. Because I am your contract? Because she was cruel. The answer landed between them with more force than either expected. Claire looked away first. I thought your world considered that a skill. Ethan stepped closer, but not too close. My world confuses cruelty with power. I stopped correcting it a long time ago. Why? His eyes moved to the city beyond the glass. Because correcting it costs more than most people are willing to pay. Claire's voice softened. And now? Ethan did not answer. The next days became a lesson in pretending. Claire learned how to step from a car without blinking at flashbulbs, how to hold Ethan's arm without gripping it like a lifeline, How to smile when reporters asked when she knew he was the one. She learned which fork to use for salad after choosing the wrong one at a charity luncheon and hearing a banker's wife whisper, "She is adorable." Like a rescued stray. Claire kept smiling until she reached the restroom, then locked herself in a stall and pressed both hands over her mouth. When she came out, Ethan was waiting near the sinks, his face dark with restrained anger. "Who said it? It does not matter. It matters to me." "Why?" "So you can buy the restaurant and fire everyone who owns silverware." His mouth twitched despite himself. Claire dried her hands, shoulders trembling with the effort not to cry. "I can learn the forks, Ethan. I can learn the dresses, the cameras, the names of people who look through me. But I cannot learn to become smaller just because it makes rich people comfortable." Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and something in his controlled world seemed to loosen. "Good," he said quietly. "Do not learn that." That night, they attended their first public dinner as an engaged couple. Madeline Frost arrived in ivory silk, graceful as a blade hidden in flowers. She kissed Ethan's cheek, then turned to Claire with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You must feel overwhelmed," Madeline said. "All this history, all this responsibility. Ethan has always needed someone who understands legacy." Claire felt every guest at the table waiting for her to fail. Her pulse hammered. Ethan's hand shifted beside his plate, not touching her, but near enough that she knew he was there. Claire smiled. "Legacy is not only what a family keeps, Miss Frost. Sometimes it is what they finally learn to change." The table went quiet. Ethan looked down to hide the smallest smile. Madeline's fingers tightened around her champagne glass. Across the room, Richard Hale watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. Later, when Claire returned to the penthouse exhausted, she found the hallway lamp outside her room glowing again. Ethan stood near his office door, jacket off, tie loosened, looking less like a billionaire and more like a man who had forgotten how to rest. "You handled her well," he said. Claire paused with her hand on the doorknob. "I was terrified. No one could tell. I could." A quiet passed between them. Then Claire asked, "Do you always leave the light on?" Ethan looked at the lamp, then at her. "Only when I know someone is trying to find their way." Claire did not know what to say to that, so she went into her room and closed the door gently. Minutes later, in the silence of the hallway, Ethan's phone lit up with a message from Richard Hale. It contained a photograph of Claire from years earlier, standing outside a courthouse beside her younger brother, her face pale with fear. Beneath it were 7 words that turned the air cold. "Ask your fiancée what she is hiding." For 3 minutes after Richard Hale's message appeared, Ethan Whitmore did not move. The photograph glowed in his hand, cold and accusing, while the hallway lamp burned softly outside Claire's door. In the picture, Claire looked younger, thinner, standing on the courthouse steps in a navy dress that did not fit quite right, one hand wrapped around the arm of a teenage boy with frightened eyes. Her brother, Ethan, guessed. The caption Richard had sent seemed simple, almost casual, but Ethan knew men like Richard never sent anything without a blade hidden beneath it. "Ask your fiancée what she is hiding." Ethan locked his phone, slipped it into his pocket, and stood in the silence until the question became heavier than the answer could possibly be. He could knock. He could demand the truth. He could remind Claire that their contract required disclosure of anything that might damage the Whitmore name. Instead, he looked at the light he had left on for her and realized something dangerous. He did not want to interrogate her. He wanted her to trust him enough to tell him herself. The next morning, Claire came into the kitchen wearing jeans, a soft white sweater, and the engagement ring that still looked too expensive for her hand. She found Ethan standing at the counter with 2 coffees, 1 black, 1 with cream, and 2 sugars. She paused. "How did you know? You make that face every time the coffee here tastes too bitter." "I have a coffee face." "You have several faces. Most of them are honest." Claire took the cup, but her smile faded when she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "Did something happen?" Ethan nearly asked her then. He nearly placed the photograph between them and watched what it did to her face. But Mrs. Alvarez entered with the morning papers, and the moment slipped away. On the front page of one society column, Claire's rented gown from the dinner had been circled in red with the headline, "Cinderella with a price tag." Claire read it once, very still, then folded the paper and placed it beneath the fruit bowl. "That is creative," she said. Ethan reached for it, but she stopped him. "No, let it stay there. Maybe the oranges need a reminder that they are lucky to be judged only by color." His mouth tightened. "I can have our legal team respond." "To what? A dress? A woman with a pen who thinks poor is a personality flaw." She lifted her coffee, but her hand shook just enough for him to see. "I am fine." Ethan hated that phrase. In his world, fine usually meant bleeding behind a locked door without making a sound. That night, they attended a private engagement dinner at the Whitmore townhouse on the Upper East Side, a narrow mansion filled with oil portraits, old silver, and relatives who smiled like they were doing charity by breathing the same air as Claire. The dining room table stretched long enough to make conversation feel like diplomacy. Margaret presided at one end, Madeline sat near the center in emerald satin, and Richard Hale arrived late, apologizing with the smooth ease of a man who expected forgiveness before asking for it. Claire sat beside Ethan, posture perfect, heart racing beneath the table. Every plate had a different fork. Every glass caught the candlelight. Every person seemed to be waiting for her to prove she had wandered into the wrong life. For nearly an hour, she survived it. She praised the soup. She remembered the name of Ethan's cousin's child. She thanked the server by name, which caused Margaret to close her eyes as if in pain. Then Madeline leaned back with a gentle smile and said, "Claire, forgive me if this is too personal, but everyone is curious. When did you know you loved Ethan?" The room softened into silence. It was a trap wrapped in romance. Claire could feel it. If she answered too sweetly, they would call her rehearsed. If she answered too simply, they would call her cold. If she mentioned the contract, everything would shatter. Ethan's hand rested near hers beneath the table, not touching, but steady as a promise he had not spoken. Claire looked at Madeline, then at the faces around her, and finally at Ethan. She remembered the night before, the unanswered question in his eyes. She remembered the way he had defended her from Margaret, the coffee waiting in the kitchen, the hallway lamp. But most of all, she remembered a night 3 weeks earlier, after a board meeting had gone badly. Ethan had come home after midnight, rain darkening the shoulders of his coat, his face stripped of every mask. He had not known Claire was still awake in the library, sitting on the floor with a book she had not been reading. He had entered the room, stopped when he saw her, and said, "You should sleep." She had answered, "So should you." He had laughed once, quietly, without humor, then sat on the floor opposite her like a man too tired to climb into his own life. For almost 20 minutes, he said nothing. Claire said nothing. The city pulsed beyond the windows. At last, Ethan had whispered, "My father built rooms where no one was allowed to be weak." Claire had looked at him, not the billionaire, not the contract, not the name, just the man sitting on the floor in wet shoes. Then this room can be different. He had covered his face with one hand, and she had stayed. She did not touch him. She did not ask him to explain. She simply stayed until his breathing steadied and the storm outside became rain instead of noise. Now, in the townhouse dining room, Claire lifted her chin. I loved him more on the night he forgot he was rich. No one spoke. Even Margaret seemed unable to form a sentence. Ethan turned toward Claire as if the room had disappeared around them. There was no polished answer that could sound like that. No public relations team could write pain so gently. Madeline's smile faltered for the first time. Richard's eye sharpened. Claire realized too late that she had said loved, not love, and the past tense hung in the air like a secret. Ethan heard it too. His expression changed, barely, but enough to hurt. After dinner, he found her on the back terrace, wrapped in a cream shawl, looking over the small garden below. The city smelled like rain and expensive stone. "Did you mean it?" he asked. Claire did not turn. "Which part?" "The part where you loved me." Her fingers tightened around the railing. "You told me once not to mistake this arrangement for something else." Ethan stepped closer. "I was trying to protect both of us." "From what?" "From wanting something that was never supposed to be real." Claire looked at him then, and the sadness in her face made him forget every rule he had written. "Too late," she whispered. He reached for her hand, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. His thumb brushed the edge of the ring, not possessive, not staged, just careful. "Claire," he said, "there is something Richard sent me." The color left her face before he finished the sentence. Ethan felt her hand go cold in his. "What did he send?" she asked. Before Ethan could answer, Claire's phone buzzed on the terrace table. Unknown number. She looked down and froze. The message was only one sentence. "Tell him about the courthouse, or I will." Claire read the message once, and the terrace seemed to lose all its air. The city lights below blurred into gold and white streaks, beautiful and useless, while Ethan stood close enough to see fear move across her face before she could hide it. "Claire," he said carefully, "look at me." She did, but only for a second. Then she turned the phone face down on the small iron table, as if the words could crawl out and poison the night. "It is nothing." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That was not nothing. Please do not ask me here." "Then come inside." "No." The word came out too fast, too sharp, and she regretted it immediately. From behind the glass doors, laughter drifted from the dining room, soft and polished, the sound of people who had never wondered whether one mistake could follow them for life. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. "The courthouse was about my brother," she said at last. Ethan went still. "The boy in the photograph." "Noah. He was 17. He borrowed a car from someone he thought was a friend. There were stolen items in the trunk. He did not know. I believed him." Her voice trembled, but she forced it steady. "I worked every job I could, sold everything I had, and found a public defender who helped us prove he was used. The record was sealed because he was a minor, but not everyone forgot." Ethan's anger shifted direction so quickly it almost frightened him. "Richard has access to sealed records? Richard has access to people who do ugly things quietly. Why did you not tell me?" Claire looked at him then, and there was pain in her eyes, but also pride. "Because your contract asked for a fiancée, not a confession." The answer struck him harder than he wanted to admit. He had built rules to protect himself, then expected honesty to grow inside them like sunlight in a locked room. Before he could respond, the terrace doors opened. Richard Hale stepped out with a drink in his hand, his expression mild, almost amused. "There you are." Margaret was worried the happy couple had escaped. Ethan turned, all warmth gone from his face. "Leave." Richard lifted both hands slightly. "I only came for air." "Then breathe somewhere else." Richard's smile thinned. His eyes moved to Claire. "Miss Bennett looks pale. I hope our family history lesson was not too much." Claire said nothing. Ethan stepped between them, not dramatically, not for show, but with a quiet finality that made Richard stop smiling. "You do not speak to her." Richard tilted his head. "Careful, Ethan. Protecting a secret can make it look more interesting." Then he walked back inside, leaving the glass door to close softly behind him. Claire exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for years. "You see now," she whispered. "He does not want the truth. He wants leverage." Ethan reached for her phone. "Give it to me." "No, Claire. If you confront him without knowing everything, he will destroy Noah first. Then my mother. Then you." Ethan stared at her. "How would he destroy me?" Claire looked through the glass at the dinner table where Madeline sat beside Margaret, smiling as if she had never lost anything. "Because the engagement is not real." The words fell between them, and for the first time, both of them heard how false they sounded. Not legally, not publicly, but here, in the cold garden air, with her hand still trembling and his heart still racing, nothing about them felt fake. Ethan lowered his voice. "It stopped being fake for me." Claire closed her eyes. That was the sentence she had wanted and feared for weeks. "Do not say that tonight." "Why?" "Because if you say it, I may believe I am allowed to stay." His face softened, but before he could answer, Daniel appeared near the door, expression tense. "Ethan, we have a problem." They followed him into a side study away from the guests. Daniel shut the door and placed a tablet on the desk. Someone leaked the engagement contract. Claire's knees nearly gave out. Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her. On the screen was a blurred photograph of the first page of their agreement. Not enough to prove every detail, but enough to start a storm. Daniel swiped to the next image. A draft headline was already circulating among private media contacts. Whitmore Air buys bride to keep empire. Ethan stared at the screen, fury sharpening every line of his face. Where did it come from? Daniel hesitated. The file was accessed from an executive terminal. Richard. Likely, but there is more. Daniel opened another document. The board received an anonymous packet accusing the foundation of misused funds. It points to transfers approved under your authority. Ethan's face changed. I did not approve hidden transfers. I know, but the records are designed to look like you did. Claire felt the room tilt again. Suddenly, the courthouse threat, the photograph, the leaked contract, all of it began forming a shape. Richard was not merely trying to embarrass them. He was building a staircase to Ethan's removal. Ethan looked at Daniel. Call our auditors. Already did. They need time. We may not have time. Claire moved toward the desk, studying the dates on the screen. These transfers began before I signed the contract. Both men looked at her. She pointed to a line item buried inside the foundation report. That vendor. I know that name. They tried to overcharge us for flowers at the gala. I remember because their invoice had the wrong address. Daniel leaned closer. You are sure? Yes. Ethan watched her, the woman everyone at that dinner had dismissed as decorative, now finding the first loose thread in a financial trap built by men with graduate degrees and private jets. Can you prove it? Claire swallowed. Maybe. The florist network keeps vendor messages. If Richard used that company as a shell, there may be a record. For the first time that night, Ethan saw not fear in her face, but resolve. Then her phone buzzed again. This time, the message contained no photograph, no threat dressed in politeness, only a time and a place. Tomorrow, 6 in the morning, Central Park, Bow Bridge. Come alone, or Noah goes back to court, and Ethan loses everything. Claire did not sleep that night. The hallway lamp outside her room stayed on, a small circle of gold against the dark, while Manhattan glittered beyond the glass like a city pretending it had no secrets. Ethan wanted security around her before dawn. Daniel wanted to call attorneys, auditors, and the private investigator on retainer. Mrs. Alvarez left warm tea outside Claire's door without knocking. Everyone wanted to protect her in ways that made sense to powerful people. But the message had been clear. Come alone. So at 5:34 in the morning, while the penthouse was still quiet and the sky over Central Park was the color of unpolished steel, Claire put on jeans, a gray coat, and the engagement ring Ethan had given her for a lie that had become the truest thing in her life. She stood at the door for almost a minute, looking back at the hallway lamp. Then she whispered, "Please forgive me," and stepped into the private elevator. The city was just beginning to wake when her cab dropped her near 72nd Street. Joggers moved through the mist. A coffee cart hissed at the curb. The park smelled of wet leaves, horse paths, and early summer rain. Bow Bridge appeared ahead, pale and graceful over the water, beautiful enough to make any threat feel impossible. Richard Hale stood near the center, wearing a navy overcoat and leather gloves, as if he had come for a morning walk instead of an execution of someone's future. Madeline Frost stood beside him, her blonde hair tucked beneath a cream scarf, her smile soft enough for cameras and cold enough for truth. Claire stopped 10 feet away. You said come alone. Richard glanced behind her. And you did. Good girl. Claire's chin lifted. Do not speak to me like that. Madeline laughed quietly. Still proud. That must be exhausting when you have so little to be proud of. Claire looked at her, and for the first time, pity moved through her fear. Madeline had everything Claire used to think made a woman safe. Money, name, beauty, doors opened before she touched them. Yet all she had done with those things was sharpen herself into someone else's wound. Richard reached into his coat and removed a folder. Here is how the next week will unfold. The contract leak becomes public. The board questions Ethan's judgment. The foundation transfers become his scandal. Your brother's sealed case becomes a human interest nightmare. Your mother's medical funding becomes suspicious. By the time the wedding arrives, Ethan will be standing beside a woman the public believes was purchased, investigated, and connected to fraud. Claire's hands went cold. None of that is true. Truth is not first to the microphone, Richard said. Noises. Madeline stepped closer. Unless you leave. Claire looked between them. Leave. Richard's voice stayed calm. On the wedding day, before the ceremony, publicly enough to humiliate him, privately enough to confuse him. No interview. No defense. No explanation beyond a letter. Make Ethan look abandoned, not corrupt. A broken heart is survivable. A federal investigation is not. The word federal made Claire's breath catch, even though no one had proved anything. That was Richard's gift, making shadows sound like prison doors. You want me to make him hate me? Madeline's smile faded. He will recover. Men like Ethan always do. Claire shook her head. You never knew him at all. For a second, Madeline's eyes flashed, wounded pride breaking through polish. Richard slipped the folder into Claire's hands. You have until the wedding. If you tell him, the first file goes out within minutes. If you disappear as instructed, your family remains untouched, and Ethan keeps enough sympathy to hold the board until we decide otherwise. Claire opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots, draft headlines, a copy of Noah's juvenile petition, hospital billing records for her mother, and a forged memo with Ethan's digital signature tied to foundation transfers. It was not evidence. It was a weapon made of paper. Claire closed it carefully. Why are you doing this? Richard's answer was almost bored. Because Ethan inherited power he does not know how to use. Madeline added. And because you made him weak. Claire looked down at the engagement ring. The diamond caught the gray morning light. For weeks, she had told herself it was part of the arrangement, a prop in an expensive performance. But now it felt like a promise she had no right to keep. No, she said softly. I did not make him weak. I reminded him he was human. Richard's patience thinned. Be sentimental in your letter. Not here. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. We will be watching. If Ethan appears at your side before the ceremony, if Daniel receives anything from you, if your brother gets moved, the deal is over. Madeline gave Claire one last look, almost triumphant. Wear the dress. Let everyone rise. Then vanish. They walked away together across the bridge, their reflections breaking in the water below. Claire stood alone until her legs remembered how to move. She did not go back to the penthouse right away. Instead, she went to Queens. Her mother was asleep in a hospital room washed in pale morning light, a blanket pulled neatly over her thin shoulders. Noah sat in the corner with a textbook open on his lap, trying to look older than 19 and braver than he felt. When he saw Claire, he stood. What happened? Claire wanted to tell him everything. Instead, she hugged him so tightly he laughed in surprise. You are scaring me, he said. I just needed to see you. Claire. She pulled back, smoothing his hair the way she had when he was little. Promise me something. Whatever anyone says about me in the next few days, you wait. You do not run. You do not argue online. You do not answer calls from numbers you do not know. Noah's face paled. Is this about Ethan? Claire smiled, but it broke before it became whole. It is about doing the right thing in the wrong way. By noon, she was back at the penthouse. Ethan was waiting in the living room, still in the shirt he had worn the night before, sleeves rolled, eyes dark with worry. Where were you? She could have lied. She could have said she needed air. Instead, she walked to him, placed one hand against his chest, and felt his heartbeat beneath her palm, trying to understand how much a person can lose and still call it love. He covered her hand with his. Let me help you. Her eyes filled, but she held the tears still. You already have. Over the next 6 days, Claire became 2 women. In public, she smiled for bridal fittings, tasted cake, chose white roses, and practiced walking down the aisle while society pages called her the luckiest woman in New York. In secret, she followed the only path left to her. She memorized invoice numbers from the folder. She visited the florist network under the excuse of final wedding arrangements. She wrote down the shell vendor's old address from memory. She asked a retired bookkeeper who had once worked charity events to check a name without alerting anyone. Bit by bit, she gathered crumbs of truth, not enough to save Ethan yet, but enough to leave a trail for him when she was gone. The night before the wedding, Ethan found her in the ballroom where the reception would be held, standing beneath hundreds of hanging white flowers. You are crying, he said. Claire wiped her face quickly. Florists cry at weddings. It is bad for business, but good for the flowers. He did not smile. Marry me tomorrow without the contract. Her heart stopped. Ethan stepped closer. I do not care about the board. I do not care about the will. I care about you. After tomorrow, no more pretending. Claire looked at the man who had once offered her 90 days and had somehow given her a home. She wanted to say yes so badly it felt like pain. Instead, she reached up and straightened his tie, though it was already perfect. Then remember me kindly, even if tomorrow makes that impossible. Confusion crossed his face. Claire, what does that mean? She kissed his cheek, gentle and brief, safe enough for a promise, heartbreaking enough for goodbye. It means I hope someday you know I chose you. The next morning, she put on the wedding dress. She placed Ethan's mother's pearl rosary around the bouquet. She tucked a cream envelope between the white roses. And hidden beneath the ribbon, where only someone searching through grief would find it, she placed a tiny flash drive marked with a single white petal. Then Claire Bennett walked to the back door of the cathedral, stepped into a waiting yellow cab, and disappeared before the music began. For the first hour after Claire vanished, Ethan Whitmore did not understand that grief could make a sound without leaving the body. He stood in the cathedral with the cream envelope in his hand, the ring in his pocket, and 300 guests spilling into the aisle around him like a tide of perfume, silk, whispers, and judgment. Daniel moved fast, blocking reporters, calling security, ordering the church staff not to touch the flowers. Margaret demanded a statement. Madeline dabbed at dry eyes with a white handkerchief. Richard stood near the side doors, calm as a man watching whether he had predicted. Ethan heard none of it clearly. His mind kept returning to the last thing Claire had said to him the night before. I hope someday you know I chose you. At the time, it had sounded tender. Now it sounded like a farewell written in a language he had refused to learn. Ethan, Daniel said, gripping his shoulder, we need to move you. Ethan looked down at the bouquet the flower girl had given him. White roses. His mother's pearl rosary. A ribbon tied too tightly around the stems. Something about that ribbon bothered him, but pain made his thoughts slow. She would not do this, he said. Daniel's face softened. Then let us find out why she did. They took him through a private side exit while the reporters shouted his name from the front steps. By the time Ethan reached the waiting car, the headlines had already begun to bloom like poison across every phone in Manhattan. Bride leaves billionaire at the altar. Mystery fiancé runs before vows. Whitmore wedding collapses in public humiliation. He sat in the back seat with the bouquet beside him, staring at the photo that had arrived from the unknown number. Claire in the yellow cab, face turned toward the cathedral, tears bright on her cheeks. It was proof she had left. It was also proof she had not wanted to. That contradiction became the only thing keeping him upright. At the penthouse, the hallway lamp still glowed outside her empty room. Ethan stopped in front of it, as if the light itself had betrayed him. Her suitcase was gone. The white sweater she had worn that first morning was folded on the chair. On the bedside table sat the coffee mug she had once called too expensive to touch. There were no dramatic ruins, no shattered mirror, no obvious confession. Just absence, arranged neatly. Ethan opened drawers, checked the closet, searched the desk. Daniel stood near the doorway, silent. There has to be something, Ethan said, his voice rough. She always left something where it mattered. Then his eyes went back to the bouquet. He pulled at the ribbon. It resisted. He untied it carefully, and something small dropped into his palm. A tiny flash drive marked with a single white petal. For the first time all day, Ethan breathed. Daniel stepped forward. What is that? Ethan closed his fist around it. The answer. But the answer was not simple. The drive held fragments, not a rescue. Vendor names, invoice numbers, photographs of addresses in Queens and Brooklyn, voice notes cut off too soon, a spreadsheet of foundation transfers with 3 lines circled in red, and one unsent recording of Claire whispering in a room where traffic hummed outside. If this reaches you, Ethan, it means I failed to tell you in time. Please do not trust Richard. Please protect Noah. Please look at the florist vendor from the gala. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Then the recording ended. No explanation for where she had gone. No proof strong enough to clear him. No way to call her back. Over the next 48 hours, Ethan turned the penthouse into a war room. Daniel brought in auditors. Lawyers arrived with sealed laptops. Security reviewed every camera between the cathedral, the hotel, and Central Park. The cab had switched plates 3 blocks south of the church, then vanished near the Queensboro Bridge. Claire's phone was found in a trash can near Lexington Avenue, wiped clean. Her mother had been transferred from the hospital the night before by paperwork that appeared legitimate but led to a closed clinic with no forwarding address. Noah had disappeared from his apartment, leaving behind only his textbooks and a note in Claire's handwriting. Stay quiet. Stay safe. Trust no one yet. Ethan read that note until the paper softened at the fold. He did not sleep. He did not change out of his wedding shirt for 2 days. When the board called an emergency meeting, he walked in with a face so calm that half the room mistook heartbreak for surrender. Richard spoke first, all concern and polished sorrow. Ethan, no one questions your pain, but the foundation irregularities and this contract scandal raise serious judgment concerns. Ethan looked at him across the table. You seem very prepared for my worst day. A few directors shifted in their seats. Richard smiled gently. Leadership requires preparation. No, Ethan said. Leadership requires patience. He placed Claire's flash drive on the table, not revealing how little it proved, only letting the silence do what power often did best. Richard's smile faded by a fraction. Ethan survived the vote by 2 seats. Sympathy helped. Fear helped more. But victory tasted like ash. Weeks passed. Summer turned brutal, then loosened into fall. The press eventually found new scandals to chase, but Claire's name remained inside Ethan's life like a room he could not enter and could not close. He kept her folded note in his desk. He kept the wedding ring in his inside pocket. He kept the hallway lamp on every night, though no one used that wing anymore. People called him colder after that. They were wrong. Cold was clean. What lived in Ethan was not cold. It was a burn that never reached the surface. He fired 2 executives, froze 3 vendor contracts, and quietly rebuilt the foundation's accounting system from the inside. He followed every crumb Claire left. The florist vendor led to a shell company. The shell company led to a mailbox in Jersey City. The mailbox led to a retired bookkeeper who refused to speak until Ethan mentioned Claire's name. The old woman looked at him through a cracked screen door and said, "That girl came here shaking, but she was not asking how to save herself. She was asking how to save you." 1 year passed before the first real break came. It was a rainy Thursday in June, almost exactly the kind of rain that had silvered the windows the night Ethan first met Claire in the ballroom. Daniel entered Ethan's office without knocking, holding a thin file. "We found a recurring payment hidden under a medical supply vendor. It is small enough not to trigger review, but it has been going out every month since the week after the wedding." Ethan looked up slowly. "To whom?" Daniel placed the file in front of him. "A flower shop in Maine. Coastal town. Population about 9,000. The business license was filed under a different name, but the handwriting on the application matches Claire's contract signature." Ethan opened the file. A photograph slid out. A small storefront painted white and blue. Buckets of flowers beneath a striped awning. A wooden sign over the door that read the empty aisle. Ethan stared at the name until the office disappeared. Daniel spoke carefully. "There is more." He handed over a second photo, taken through a rain-streaked windshield. Claire stood outside the shop in a dark green apron, thinner than before, her hair shorter, her face turned toward the ocean wind. Beside her was Noah, carrying boxes. In the window behind them, barely visible between white roses, was the same hallway lamp from Ethan's penthouse, glowing like a promise that had somehow survived a year of silence. Ethan Whitmore arrived in the small Maine town just after sunrise, alone, without Daniel, without security, without the polished army of people who usually stood between him and pain. The Atlantic wind came cold off the water, sharp with salt and rain, pushing at his black overcoat as he stepped from the rental car and stood across the street from the little flower shop with the impossible name. The empty aisle. For a full minute, he could not move. There were white roses and tin buckets by the door. A striped awning snapped softly in the wind. Through the front window, a lamp glowed on a narrow wooden counter. The same lamp from the hallway outside Claire's room in his penthouse. The one he had left burning every night after she disappeared. The one he thought had become a monument to absence. Here it was alive, warm, waiting in a place that smelled of ocean fog and second chances. Claire came out carrying a crate of flowers against her hip. Her hair was shorter now, brushing her shoulders, and the green apron tied around her waist made her look like the woman he had first met before cameras and contracts and cathedral doors. She was thinner, yes, and there was a tiredness around her eyes that money could not soften. But when she bent to set the crate down, when she touched the bruised petals of a rose and turned it gently toward the light, Ethan felt the last year collapse inside him. She had not vanished into nothing. She had been here, breathing, working, surviving, while he had lived with a ghost. A bell over the shop door rang as an older woman stepped out behind her with a cane in one hand and a paper bag in the other. Claire turned to help her. "Mom, I told you I could carry that." Her mother smiled. "And I told you I still have 2 hands." Noah appeared next, taller now, steadier, wearing a college sweatshirt beneath his jacket. He laughed at something their mother said. For one strange second, Ethan saw what Claire had protected. Not a scandal, not a secret, not a weakness, but a small family trying to stay whole. Then Claire looked across the street and saw him. The crate slipped slightly in her hands. Noah caught it before it fell. The three of them froze in the pale morning light. Ethan crossed the street slowly, every step heavier than the last. He had rehearsed anger on the drive from Portland. He had imagined demands, accusations, the hard, clean sentences of a man who deserved answers. But when he stopped in front of her, all he could say was, "You are alive." Claire's eyes filled instantly, though she did not let the tears fall. Ethan. His name in her voice hurt more than the letter had. One year, he said. "I buried you without a body, Claire." Her mother touched Noah's arm, and the two quietly went inside, leaving the door open behind them. Claire stood in the doorway, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles paled. "I did not know how to come back. You knew how to leave." The words were not loud, but they struck her. She accepted them without defense. Yes. Ethan looked at the sign above the door. The empty aisle. Was that meant to be a joke? No, she whispered. It was meant to be a punishment. His jaw tightened. For me or for you? For both of us. Rain began to mist over the street, not enough to send anyone running, only enough to blur the edges of the world. Claire stepped aside. Come in. The shop was small and warm, filled with buckets of hydrangeas, roses, eucalyptus, and wildflowers that looked gathered from roadsides instead of imported for ballrooms. There were handwritten order cards clipped to twine, a kettle steaming near the back, and on one shelf, carefully framed, a dried white petal from their wedding bouquet. Ethan saw it and had to look away. Claire closed the door. I wanted to tell you. Then why did you not? She walked behind the counter and unlocked a drawer with a tiny brass key. Because Richard was watching every message, every account, every person connected to me. Because Madeline knew how to make the press hungry before the truth could breathe. Because Noah's sealed record could be twisted into a headline, and my mother's care could be made to look like a bribe, and your foundation had forged transfers already waiting to carry your name into court. You should have trusted me. I did. Claire pulled out a wooden box and placed it on the counter between them. I trusted you to keep fighting after I made you angry enough not to follow me blindly. Ethan stared at her. The sentence opened something old and raw. You think breaking me was strategy? No, her voice shook. It was the worst thing I have ever done. And every morning I opened this shop, I paid for it again. She lifted the lid. Inside were files, drives, printed invoices, bank statements, photographs, and a small notebook filled with dates in Claire's handwriting. The first flash drive only had crumbs because I had to leave in minutes. This is the rest. I tracked the shell vendor from the gala. The overbilled flowers were never about flowers. They were a pipeline. Small payments moved through event companies, medical supply accounts, and consultant fees, then disappeared into companies tied to Richard's brother-in-law. Madeline helped create the public story, but Richard built the financial trap. Ethan's eyes moved over the documents, his business mind waking even as his heart stood bleeding beside it. The names matched. The dates matched. The vendor from the gala. The medical supply payments. The mailbox in Jersey City. All of it. Claire reached deeper into the box and pulled out a cream envelope, worn at the corners. This is the letter. I wanted to leave you, not the one Richard made me write. Ethan did not take it at first. He looked at her, as if one more piece of paper might finish what the first had started. Then he opened it. The handwriting was hers, softer in places where tears had warped the ink. Ethan, I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I left because loving you became the only way to protect you. I knew you would try to save me first, and that would give them exactly what they needed. So I made you hate me long enough to look at the evidence instead of my face. Ethan's hand lowered slowly. The room seemed too small for the silence between them. I never hated you, he said, and the words came out broken. Claire covered her mouth with one hand. I needed you to. I tried. He looked at the letter again. I failed every day. For the first time, Claire cried openly, without turning away. Ethan stepped toward her, then stopped, giving her the choice she had once taken from both of them. Claire crossed the final distance herself. She leaned into him, and he held her carefully, not like a man reclaiming what was his, but like someone holding a truth that had almost been lost forever. Outside, the rain thickened against the window. Inside, the hallway lamp glowed over them, small and stubborn and warm. Then Noah appeared at the back of the shop, face pale, holding a laptop. Claire, he said, you need to see this. She pulled away, wiping her cheeks. Ethan turned as Noah set the laptop on the counter and pressed play. A security recording filled the screen, grainy but clear enough. Bowbridge. Richard's voice. Madeline's voice. The words Ethan had waited a year to hear. Were the dress. Let everyone rise. Then vanish. Ethan went completely still. Claire whispered, that is the proof. Before anyone could speak, Ethan's phone began to ring. Unknown number. He answered without looking away from the screen. Richard Hale's voice came through, smooth and quiet. If you were standing beside her, Ethan, then you just made your last mistake. Richard Hale's threat filled the little flower shop like a cold draft, but Ethan Whitmore did not flinch. 1 year earlier, those words might have driven him into rage, into command, into the kind of reckless protection Claire had feared. Now he only looked at the security recording on Noah's laptop, then at Claire, then at the phone in his hand. No, Richard, he said quietly. My last mistake was believing silence could protect the people I love. On the other end, Richard gave a soft laugh. You always were dramatic when cornered. Ethan's eyes did not leave Claire's face. You were on speaker. The line went still. Noah's hand froze above the keyboard. Claire's mother appeared near the back room doorway, one hand pressed to her chest, watching the past finally walk into daylight. Richard recovered quickly. Then listen carefully. Whatever you think you have will be challenged. Files can be misunderstood. Recordings can be questioned. Claire has a history. Your engagement was a contract, and the public already knows you were humiliated. You will look desperate. Ethan glanced at the wooden box on the counter, at the letter stained by tears, at the lamp glowing beside the white roses. Maybe, but desperate people tell the truth faster than powerful people tell lies. He ended the call before Richard could answer. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Ethan looked at Noah. Send the recording to Daniel. Send the documents too. Every file, every invoice, every photograph, every note Claire kept. Noah swallowed. What if they come after us? Ethan's voice softened. Then they come after all of us in the open. Claire looked up at him. The old fear was still there, but something else had returned beneath it, something she had almost forgotten in the year she spent punishing herself with survival. Hope. Within an hour, Daniel Price had organized the evidence into a timeline sharp enough to cut through rumor. Within 3 hours, Whitmore Global's independent auditors confirmed that Claire's vendor trail matched irregular transfers hidden across multiple shell companies. By sunset, Ethan's legal team had delivered the Bow Bridge recording, the forged documents, and Richard's vendor connections to the proper authorities. By the next morning, the story that had once destroyed Claire began to turn around. At 9 o'clock, Ethan stood in the main conference room of Whitmore Global, the same room where Richard had once questioned his judgment, and faced the board, the press, and every person who had mistaken cruelty for intelligence. Claire stood beside him in a simple navy dress from her own closet, not borrowed, not styled, not chosen to please anyone. Her hands trembled, but she did not hide them. Ethan placed the original engagement contract on the table. Cameras clicked. Madeline Frost sat 2 rows back, pale and silent, her perfect posture failing by inches. Richard was absent. His chair remained empty, and somehow that empty chair told the truth better than any speech. Ethan began without notes. 1 year ago, a woman was blamed for abandoning me. The world called her a liar, a social climber, and a coward. I allowed silence to stand where truth should have stood, because I did not yet understand what she had sacrificed. He turned slightly toward Claire, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Claire Bennett did not leave me for money. She did not leave me for attention. She left because people inside my company threatened her family, forged evidence against my foundation, and used her kindness as leverage. She saved my life's work by letting the world believe she had broken my heart. Claire's eyes filled, but she stayed upright. Margaret sat in the back, her face unreadable, the old certainty gone. Ethan picked up the contract. This began as an agreement. It had rules. No love, no questions, no interference. It was the most expensive cowardice I ever wrote. A quiet ripple moved through the room. Then Ethan tore the contract in half. The sound was small, almost fragile, but Claire felt it through her whole body. He placed the torn pages on the table and continued. No one should have to earn dignity through wealth. No one should be made invisible because of their last name, their bank account, or the mistakes powerful people choose to weaponize. Effective immediately, the Whitmore Foundation will fund legal protection and medical support for families targeted by financial abuse, sealed record exploitation, and coercive employment practices. It will be named the Bennett Integrity Fund, if Claire permits it. Claire turned to him, surprised. He did not ask with his eyes like a billionaire seeking approval. He asked like a man who had learned that love without consent was only another contract. Claire nodded once, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. The room erupted in questions, but Ethan raised his hand. One more thing. He reached into his inside pocket and removed the wedding ring he had carried for a year. I kept this because I did not know how to let go. Today, I am not using it to ask for forgiveness in public. Forgiveness is not a performance. He closed his fingers around it and looked at Claire. The rest is between us. Hours later, when the cameras were gone and the first reports confirmed that Richard's accounts had been frozen and Madeline's involvement was under formal review, Ethan returned to Maine with Claire. He did not bring reporters. He did not bring flowers purchased by assistants. He brought one small brass key. The flower shop was quiet when they entered. The sign in the window had been flipped to closed. Rain tapped gently against the glass. The hallway lamp glowed on the counter, warm as a heartbeat. Claire stood behind the register, touching the edge of the torn contract Ethan had placed there beside the key. What is this? She asked, though her voice already knew. Ethan looked around the shop, at the white roses, at the framed dried petal, at the name above the door that had carried their pain for a year. Not a penthouse key, not a condition, not a rescue. He stepped closer, careful as always now, leaving space for her answer. It is the key to the house I bought 2 blocks from here. Small porch, blue shutters, terrible plumbing, according to the inspector. I thought it might need someone who knows damaged things can still be saved. Claire gave a broken laugh through her tears. You bought a house with terrible plumbing? I am learning humility. That may take years. I have time. Silence settled between them, but this time it was not empty. It was full of everything they had survived and everything they were no longer pretending not to want. Ethan placed the ring on the counter, beside the key, not pushing it toward her. I am not asking you to marry me today. I am asking if I may start with dinner, tomorrow, with no board, no contract, no cameras, and no one waiting at the end of an aisle. Claire looked at the key, then at the ring, then at the man who had finally come to her without armor. And if I say yes to dinner, she whispered. Ethan's eyes softened. Then I will pick you up at 7. And if you are not ready, I will wait. Claire stepped around the counter and took the key, not the ring, not yet. The choice mattered. Ethan understood that now. She placed it in her palm, closed her fingers around it, and smiled with the kind of courage that had once broken his heart to save it. 7, she said. Outside, the rain began to clear. Inside, beneath the glow of the little lamp, Claire Bennett stayed exactly where she was. This time, no music had to start. No guest had to rise. No door had to open. And this time, when Ethan reached for her hand, she did not disappear.